So we've got this article, right? And as I said, in the broad scope of the sweep of the universe's history, this is a fairly light article. And I think someone even chatted and said, hey, it seemed like just a mistake. That's totally fine. Sometimes we can look at these things best when we're looking at them as essentially somewhat innocuous. Now, I will tell you that what this is about outing someone, talking about their partnership status in a way that they might prefer not to have talked about. So that is an area of sensitivity for a number of folks, obviously, and with good reason. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because of the way it was written and then the responses that this particular outlet, the Sydney Morning Herald, I believe, actually had to it. So here we have an opinion piece. It's June 11th, 2022. That's 3 days ago. Rebel, and this is referring to Rebel Wilson, an actress, starts spreading the news of relationship. And that could be interesting, but if you followed any of this and you looked at this article before, you know that this is actually a little bit damning just from the very headline itself. Because one of the things that the Sydney Morning Herald, or more specifically this columnist, is upset about is the fact that Rebel started spreading the news of this relationship effectively without them and on notice that they were going to put an article up. So we take a look at this article. It's very long. Oh no. This Private Sydney column, and apparently Private Sydney is, as best I can tell, kind of one of their column names for like celebrity culture. I don't know how deep it goes, gossiping, that kind of thing that you might expect from some newspapers of some type. So this is the individual, this is the columnist that goes and talks about celebrity relationships or what's happening. This is the kind of guy that would have been reporting on Depp v. Heard during that process, or even while they were married. The Private Sydney column about Rebel Wilson has been taken down. Here, Andrew Hornery says he made mistakes and will learn from them. And that's the author here. And that's the headline that I used in the thumbnail. But the article is gone. Now, that's interesting, right? And I'd be interested in your comments here in terms of ethics and rules and things. We've talked a lot in this space about how the Washington Post has really tripped all over itself trying to explain the unexplainable with what it included in the article about the YouTubers covering the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial and the mistakes it made in saying that they were contacted or they were attempted to be contacted, et cetera, et cetera. But the article has stayed up with a big, long editor's note. And in terms of how to deal with one of these things, it is an open question to me about whether or not it's a good idea to completely remove it because, I'll be honest, that this article wasn't really made in good faith. We're going to take some of the clips because they were captured on Twitter, as all things are. The internet is forever, or whether it's better to have the kind of editor's note approach. This is wrong. Here's our apology, but here's how it looked when we got things wrong, essentially to continue to hold our feet to the fire, because this is going to be lost to the mists of time a little bit, even though we can build it back together with the archive or with the Twitter, etc. It's a little bit less transparent than it otherwise would have been. And I'm really of two minds on this. I think it's good to not have stuff that is essentially in poor taste out there and just aimed at them directly. But also, if you're an outlet like this, to just say, hey, it's gone, here's our apology. I don't know. I'd like to reflect on what exactly you're apologizing for. And I don't know that I can do that as easily if I'm a reader of your paper when this is the format that you take. So I'm not coming down too harshly either direction on this, but it did surprise me that it was just gone. It wasn't a note. We've taken it down. It is gone because it isn't the kind of thing that is erroneous on its face. And we're going to take a look at it. Instead, it just kind of looks bad for the newspaper. And if that's the context, I think my inclination is to say, well, this is probably the kind of newspaper report that should stay up because it just makes you look bad. And this is otherwise going to be known news, and you should reflect on what you've done. But thankfully, we can reflect on what they've done for them. So this is a Twitter account that was actually linked to me. Like I said, I do follow your DMs, and a couple of people sent me this article to talk about. This is a Twitter account from Megha Mohan, who I believe is with the BBC, if I'm remembering correctly, staff reporter for BBC World. I've just read this Sydney Morning Herald piece 3 times to make sure that I wasn't misreading. The publication messaged Rebel Wilson saying they would out her in 2 days and is now complaining that she chose to announce her relationship with a woman herself. Quite astonishing. And it really is. If you actually look at this, so, and I apologize for it being so small. If we look at this article, it has kind of style that I guess I expect from gossip columns. It has that kind of, oh, we're all in it, we're whispering around a table kind of thing. And I think that's probably how it's designed to be written. So we can look at it with those eyes, but that doesn't make this concept any better. So it says, Rebel starts spreading the news of relationship, coming out Rebel style. In a perfect world, quote unquote, outing, same-sex celebrity relationship should be a redundant concept in 2022. Love is love, right? So that's what he starts out with. He is trying to establish, and he will try to establish more fulsomely, that this is something that should be a happy thing. And so he didn't view it as something that would be threatening or otherwise that the Rebel Wilsons of the world would have to get in front of. But as Rebel Wilson knows, we do not live in a perfect world. So it was an abundance of caution and respect that this media outlet emailed Rebel Wilson's representatives on Thursday morning, giving her 2 days to comment on her new relationship with another woman, LA leisure wear designer Ramona Agruma, before publishing a single word. Big mistake, says this author. Wilson opted to gazump the story, posting about how her new Disney princess on Instagram early Friday morning, the same platform she had previously used to brag about her handsome ex-boyfriend, wealthy American beer baron, that's a heck of a title, Jacob Bush. And I think she even had her bestie, the author Hugh Sheridan, doing radio interviews on Breakfast FM on Friday morning, during which he gloated about introducing the women to each other 6 months ago. Apparently, they had hit it off pretty much immediately, but had kept the relationship under wraps. Considering how bitterly Wilson had complained about poor journalism standards when she successfully sued Women's Day for defamation, her choice to ignore our discreet, genuine, and honest queries was, in our view, underwhelming. So this is the article that gets taken down. And outside of the subject matter, as I said, this is obviously an area of sensitivity. An outlet should know that and not really expect anything different in terms of how a subject would respond. But the actual problem I have with this isn't so much that you're even grumpy about it. This is, I think, grumpy will be the term that they use, I believe, not the Amber Heard version of grumpy, but a different version of grumpy. But that you actually go out in your column and effectively treat this news item like you're the owner of it, right? I had to actually look up the phrase gazump. I didn't know this. Apparently, it's informal British, but it means basically in this context to swindle, right? That the implication here is that I sent you a notice because I'm a good ethical journalist. We're going to talk about ethics in just a second. And you had the audacity to reveal this news item yourself. You knew we were going to make a story. We asked you for comment, and then you gazumped us, or more specifically, you gazumped the story, and you went out with this news item on your own. And my initial reaction to this is, yeah, that's her story to tell. And not only did you put her in a position where I can imagine the public relations communications and how are we going to handle this and all these various things, because that's what happens when a journalist calls you or emails you and says, you have 2 days to tell us something on this, or I'm going to publish this story. But it is entirely her news item. So to then complain about it, to then have a finish off to your column that says, we find it underwhelming because you complained about poor journalism in another capacity, as if you have some obligation to respond to us, that we have the right to this story and how dare you go out with it on your own, is amazing. It's absolutely amazing, but you do get some insight into at least how some folks think about this process in the moment. We're going to look at apologies. They're going to walk all this back. That's totally fine. But when we do look at those apologies, it's important to remember how things reacted in the first instance. Oh, and I have a different definition here, so I apologize. Again, gazump, not a phrase I'm familiar with. We've got Kirkos here saying it is to trump, not the politics, the original definition, to trump or one-up someone. There's two definitions. I really appreciate that. So not to swindle, although it's coming from the same kind of tree of understanding, I would be willing to bet, but effectively to say, to take our thing and to do it in front of us, to do it better, to trump our story, which makes a lot more sense, more specifically. So I appreciate that. And here we have a super chat. Rebel is a qualified lawyer in Australia or elsewhere. That's actually really, really interesting. And it was interesting to see that there was a reference to a fact that she had already been involved in a defamation lawsuit. But thank you for the super chat there. A lot of good information here. And we're going to look at, like I said, the apologies, but as a starting point, like this goes out and it's a celebration is what they will later say of this great news. It's this stuff that is crazy to me, right? Big mistake. She went up in front of us and did this story. And we're going to see how they react to this, right? Because this is June 11th. We're going to see a note on June 12th. We're going to talk about ethics a little bit first, though, right? Because as we know, we've been talked about as tabloid grifters. We've been talked about as various things. We aren't the Poynter Institute. We can't hold journalists to ethical standards, except, as I said in that video, the ethical standards are for us. The ethical standards are for the consuming public, because journalists could do whatever they want. And we're going to talk about legalities here a little bit, but ethics are important because this is a process that is ostensibly done by professionals, and they should have rules. Lawyers have rules. Lawyers have a bar. We can get decertified. We can no longer be a lawyer or practice as a lawyer if our bar associations find that we did something wrong. There isn't a similar kind of, at least technical concept for journalists in most instances. And I pulled up the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. There are like hundreds of these, but there were a number of references to this one. So I thought we would use this as just a jumping off point. I can't promise you that this is what the Sydney Morning Herald follows. In fact, I would be willing to bet it doesn't. But all of these share certain conceits, and we can talk about them, right? So the members of the Society of Professional Journalists believe that public enlightenment is the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. So, light stakes here. Ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity. And the Society declares these 4 principles as the foundation of ethical journalism and encourages their use in its practice by all people in the media. So the first principle, seek the truth and report it. Seemingly simple enough, but we're going to have some sub-rules here. Ethical journalism should be accurate and fair. It's a good starting point, accuracy. Journalists should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information, but journalists should take responsibility for the accuracy of the work. Remember that neither speed nor format excuses inaccuracy. Format's going to be important here. Provide context, gather, update, and correct information throughout the life of a news story. We see the Washington Post struggling with that one. Be cautious when making promises. Identify sources clearly. Consider sources' motives before promising anonymity. None of that pops up here. Diligently seek subjects of news coverage to allow them to respond to criticism or allegations of wrongdoing. Now, the focus here is criticism and wrongdoing. Ostensibly, hey, make sure that you go get comment from people that are being put in a negative light. And one of the defenses that the Sydney Morning Herald author and editor has here is effectively, we hadn't actually decided to publish what this story would look like when we sent out the comment. And this is a happy day kind of news story. But even in that column, that fact is belied because he says, we know that we don't live in a perfect world. We know that this kind of private information is private for a reason, and that you should have a good reason from an ethical standpoint of going in and putting out this kind of news story. Now, he also will say, well, look, I run a gossip column. And so it presents different ethical standards. We already talked about format, but what's important here is that you should go and try to seek comment from folks that you're going to put in this negative light. It's also probably, if we're breaking things down on another axis, why the Washington Post, either Lorenz, the reporter, or the editor, puts that parenthetical in with respect to Legal Bites and that umbrella guy, because that is rightfully seen as a negative light. They are included in that article to show they are motivated by money, and this platform is moving people in different directions. They are pivoting towards directions where the money is, and we need to look at YouTube and be very, very cross with that platform. But they didn't do that. So that's probably why the item comes in, and yet they didn't actually seek comment, and it looks like they scrambled because they know that they should have. Now, I honestly don't think that they really needed to seek comment from Alita at Legal Bites or that umbrella guy, and so I think this is kind of inconsequential, but the Washington Post might feel very differently about that, which is why potentially you saw them scrambling around this entire concept, because once they thought they should have and they knew they didn't, it becomes a different ball of wax. You're supposed to avoid undercover or other surreptitious methods of gathering information unless you really have to. It's a good ethical rule, by the way. Be vigilant and courageous about holding those with power accountable. Support the open and civil exchange of views, even views you find repugnant. Recognize a special obligation to serve as watchdogs over public affairs. Provide access to source material when it's relevant. Boldly tell the story of the diversity and magnitude of the human experience. Avoid stereotyping. Label advocacy and commentary. That's one that I don't think the journalists do very well at all. We certainly try here in Virtual Legality, but you are supposed to say, hey, now I'm advocating. Now this is an editorial because the rest is news, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see that quite often enough for my liking. I don't know about you. And then we've got minimize harm. Balance the public's need for information against potential harm or discomfort. Now, this gets kind of dicey, and we might even discuss this in a different format, in a different article's setting. But you're supposed to look at this and say, how important is this really? What will it take to get the information? And in the grand scheme of the universe, just as I said before we started talking about this article, Rebel Wilson's love life is very low on the list of things that we as a public need to know about. Show compassion for those who may be affected by news coverage. Recognize that legal access to information differs from an ethical justification to publish or broadcast. I love this one, right? Because you've heard me say in this space, what is right is not always legal. And what is legal is not always right. And that's a very important kind of concept because laws are written by people. They are words on the page. They are the rules of the board game that you unpack and dump on your table. They tell you how to play it, but it might not be the best way to play it. And so you always have to evaluate these things. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Right? We've got CGI dinosaurs running across America and movie theaters all around the world because of that very notion. They didn't ask whether they should. They just asked whether they could. And this is a great rule. It unfortunately doesn't inform the average journalist in any specific way. Hey, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. That just refers to the rest of the rules for whatever your ethical reasoning might be. But it's still a good concept. Just because you stumble across this information, just because you develop and acquire this information, doesn't mean it's important enough, right? We're in the section about minimizing harm. Realize that private people have a greater right to control information about themselves than public figures and others who seek power, influence, or attention. Weigh the consequences of publishing or broadcasting personal information. And here again, we run up against this concept, right? Rebel Wilson is a public figure of a sort. But as far as I know, she's not seeking to pass laws. She's not seeking to affect political change or otherwise impose on the rest of the body politic, either in Australia or the globe. She is an actress. And maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe she's a very adamant activist on some things that she cares about. I don't know. You guys can leave that in the chat. But overall, when they talk about this rule, the way I read it, it's more about, hey, you probably have additional leeway when you're talking about a president, when you're talking about someone that is otherwise doing something that can affect us all, rather than an actress that is, in an a cappella movie and that kind of thing. So when we look at these, I think it's important to put them in context. And right now you have all this context that says, hey, go get contact, go be aware of the discomfort you cause, figure out whether you should be putting this, avoid pandering to lurid curiosity, which is a great phrase. It's a great band name. Lurid curiosity is an awesome bit of language here, and I love it. But avoid pandering to it, even if others do, right? When you're looking at this and other journalists pander to lurid curiosity, try to be better, try to be more professional. And I think, honestly, this is where you see some of the kind of high and mighty moralistic standards that the Guardian or the New York Times or the Washington Post has put on, like the Depp v. Heard kind of concept, right? In Taylor Lorenz's article about YouTube coverage, there's a whole paragraph about, well, while we were worried about important things, these people were handling this trial. And, there's a certain element of truthfulness there, but there's a certain element of just trying to sit on your high horse and not pay attention to what people are interested in legitimately, right? This isn't people dumpster diving and figuring out what was happening in this marriage. This was an actual public court trial that had implications that now the media is trying to say existed the whole time, right? If this is so darn important to all these various things that you're otherwise chin stroking or navel gazing about, then wasn't it worth the time to cover the trial in the first instance? Obviously. But that's the kind of trap they get into. Now, I didn't cover the rest of these rules as much because they don't impact this. Act independently, don't take bribes and things, and be accountable and transparent, where we see things like Fix your mistakes and correct them promptly and prominently. Explain corrections and clarifications carefully and clearly. This one's for you, Washington Post. You should check this one out right here. I think you could do that better. But that's the ethics of the situation, right? And I think we can see together that at least quite a few things are implicated here, which is why it's interesting that the next day, the Sydney Morning Herald goes out with an editor's note. Now this is bigger, ostensibly, than the note on top of the Taylor Lorenz article. It's its own article. It's the next day, and it says a note on Rebel Wilson by an individual named Bevan Shields. On Saturday, the Herald published an article about Australian actor Rebel Wilson and her new partner, Ramona Gruma. The article ran online and was a small item on page 36 of Saturday's print edition. So we can read, right? We can do critical analysis here. We know what direction this is going. Very first paragraph of the article, you should know. It was very small. It was on a very late page in the newspaper. What are we even doing here, people? It already has that kind of air of, I guess I have to write this note, but this was not a big deal. The article has promoted some public attention, and I've been reading this feedback closely. In the interests of transparency, I wanted to offer the Herald's view on this issue. Well, thank you for deigning to speak to us on this. Our weekly private Sydney celebrity column last week asked Wilson if she wished to comment about her new partner. We would have asked the same questions had Wilson's new partner been a man. To say that the Herald outed Wilson is wrong. So doubling down here, sticking to your guns. Understand that as far as I know, Rebel Wilson had never been seen in the company in this manner of a woman, and gets a note from the Sydney Morning Herald that says, hey, get back to us on a very short deadline. We're publishing this this weekend. I don't know how you want to frame that. That's really up to you. But certainly saying this so defiantly brings some alarm bells in my head, like other mastheads do every day. It's a bit of a pet peeve here. When they refer to themselves as mastheads, it just strikes me as odd. Masthead here, this is the actual name of the outlet. I guess I like to use outlets here because a masthead is a thing, but they refer to themselves like this. Just a pet peeve. We saw this, I think it was yesterday, talking about the Washington Post and the tua culpa, which everyone came into the comments and said, that's what the it is. I don't disagree. I think that is what it refers to. I still think it's very difficult to read, but I will take the comment well advised. They referred to the masthead as doing something. And it's like, well, no, this is designed to really make it a little bit more anonymous, right? It's people all the way down. It's editors, it's journalists, it's associate editors, it's features department heads, everything that we've talked about in the past. It's people all the way down. Mastheads don't do anything. It's always human action. And when we look at this, it's designed to make you think, well, the Sydney Morning Herald did something. And we can kind of passive voice this a little bit. We simply ask questions. And as a standard practice, included a deadline for response. Hey, all we did was go out there and ask questions, right? It's not like there's a rule of ethics that talks about being aware of how news gathering will feel to the party in question, right? It's not like there's anything that talks about potential harm or discomfort or acknowledging the fact that news gathering is an uncomfortable kind of concept, right? Pursuit of the news is not a license for arrogance or undue intrusiveness, but we were just asking questions. This is a person that decided to be an actress, and, well, that makes it open season. I had made no decision about whether or what to publish, and the Herald's decision about what to do would have been informed by any response Wilson supplied. Hey, you could have gotten mad back at us, and you did give a comment then to a journalistic outlet that can then print that comment and say, you're very, very angry, you're cross at us. But don't worry about that, because we are very respectful and ethical people, which is an interesting thing to say in an editor's note, effectively quasi-apologizing for the article that actually did go up. Wilson made the decision to publicly disclose her new partner, who had been a feature of her social media accounts for months. So she made the decision. Our columnist was upset about it, but then, hey, everybody knew about this already. That's a wild bit of rhetorical flourish, right? Pick a lane. Private Sydney is a column in which the writer's interaction with his subjects is often part of the story. Saturday's piece followed that theme in giving readers insights into our interaction with Wilson and her PR team. This was not a standard news story. We wish Wilson and Agruma well. So this is interesting. This is the notion that because of your format, because of the way that you choose to make a column out of these interactions, that this doesn't count as a news story. which I think we looked at in the code of ethics that we did as not true, right? You don't get an out for ethical considerations of another or what their situation is simply because you otherwise want to frame it as a gossip column and it's just cool kids chatting around the table. That doesn't get you out of what your professional ethical standards would be, which is something that you know because you're now deigning to make an editor's note about it, right? At the point in time where you have to write this, coming to the end and saying, I shouldn't have to write this, isn't a great argument, isn't a great excuse, which is why this is not the end of our tale. It is, however, the end of our tale in this format, in this particular website. So we have to stop the screen using the magic of background StreamYard technology and share a different one. So hang on with me for just a second. And we get to what was the thumbnail image to this article. So after all of this is said, we've looked at some ethics. We looked at the original commentary. They are upset that she went and, what is it, gazumped, something along those lines. The story right out from under them. The next day after, we went June 11th, we went June 12th. This is June 13th. Oh, wait, this is tumbling out of control. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. Apparently, our editor's note with a non-apology didn't assuage the people that are upset about these various things. Oh no, who could have guessed this current state of affairs? Well, enter June 13th. I've made mistakes. Or more specifically, I made mistakes over Rebel Wilson and we'll learn from them. Here's Andrew Hornery coming up. On the weekend, I wrote about the background leading to Rebel Wilson's social media post. We can do this a little bit better. Revealing her new relationship with another woman. I have learned some new and difficult lessons from this, and I want to be upfront with you about the things I got wrong. And let me say, first and foremost, I'm reading it a little dramatically, but to me, this is the right way to say one of these apologies. The editor's note was the wrong way. That's trying to say, none of this is important. Why am I even here? Why am I doing this? It was a short thing on page 36. You all are making me because of how you're responding to these things publicly, but whatever. As you get further and further on, this is usually what you see. This is what I had expected from the Washington Post, not quintupling down on what is still an erroneous editor's note, but instead getting to the point where you say, you know what, they actually need legitimate contrition here. And you don't have to believe them because they're obviously being forced to do it, but at least it sounds right. I've learned new and difficult lessons, want to be upfront about the things I got wrong. This is a good start to one of these kinds of articles. I genuinely regret that Rebel has found this hard. These are the kinds of things that are appropriate to comment on, right? To acknowledge that somebody else could have a different perspective from you, even if I'm giving you the full benefit of the doubt, and that as a news gathering body, a journalist, you should be sensitive to that. That is your ethical requirement, is to at least consider that. You could consider it and then find it to still be useful and something that should go out into the news, but to actually consider it. And now you have good reflection from this journalist, at least as presented in words on a page. You can evaluate the sincerity yourself, that says, I genuinely regret that Rebel found this hard. That was never my intention, but I see she has handled it all with extraordinary grace. So we're going to be sincere. I am genuinely regretful. She has done this well. She has done this better than me. Honestly, this is the way to write one of these. As a gay man, which we didn't know before, I'm well aware of how deeply discrimination hurts. The last thing I would ever want to do is inflict that pain on someone else. Writing a weekly column about the personal lives of the rich, powerful, and famous comes with its own unique set of challenges. And I don't think that that's wrong. I don't think that that's inaccurate because you're running up against those ethical rules in a very weird way. Because ostensibly, no one actually needs to know who Rebel Wilson's boyfriend is, who Rebel Wilson's girlfriend is, who any of these celebrities are otherwise doing things with if it doesn't impact something important. But the public likes to know these things. It sells newspaper copies. And at some level, it's also kind of useful for these celebrities to get into the media. So there's a kind of parasocial relationship between these various things. So it's a difficult thing to do. I don't deny that. However, when you bring it up in this apology, which is something that you were doing very well with, it starts to sound like you're leaning a little bit on that editor's note about the format is the reason why we can do this, right? That because we've chosen to do a celebrity gossip column, then we get special dispensation. And that's just not the fact. A celebrity romance is a happy story. When I started hearing from friends and associates of Rebel that she was in a new relationship as a gossip columnist, I could see that was potentially a story. as her previous boyfriends had been. So after months of posts of the women together on Rebel's Instagram account, from Oscar parties to Valentine's Day, and most recently as VIP guests at the Gay and Lesbian World Pride polo match in Florida, I assumed there was a good chance she might be happy to discuss it. Now, this is, at least, it's a little bit of excuse making, but it is a reasoned kind of position, right? That this individual could think it's a happy story. Now, by the time he's writing his article, so we have to discount this, he knows it's not, right? He's talking about imperfect worlds while he's angry at her not responding to him and otherwise gazumping, whatever it is, his story. Then we get to this point in time where he explains why he thought it might be happy. And it's not inaccurate. I can buy this, but it also rings a little bit hollow by the time we're looking at the story he actually did write. She had already revealed a month ago that she had been dating and was very happy, but we mishandled steps in our approach. So now we've gotten the genuine regretfulness. We've gotten a sincere sounding apology. We have a little light defensiveness, but something that we can at least allow for, because maybe you'd be defensive too. And now we're going to talk about the specifics. I was told by her management to put my questions in an email, which is standard course. Given I have a column every Saturday, I have a deadline, and it is standard procedure to set out the time frame. It is always up to the subject whether or how they want to engage. At 9:27 a.m. last Thursday, so it's early morning Thursday, at least in Australia. Good morning. I'm a journalist from the Sydney Morning Herald, and I was hoping I could get a comment from Rebel regarding her new relationship. While I realize Rebel's partner has not been mentioned as of yet, I have several sources who have confirmed their status, and I have enough details to publish. And this is probably the sentence where they make a little bit of a mistake. However, in the interests of transparency and fairness, before publishing, I am reaching out to Rebel to see if she will engage in what I believe is a happy and unexpected news story for her, especially given the recent Pride celebrations. My deadline is Friday, 1 p.m. Sydney time. Regards, Andrew Hornery. So he sends this at 9 a.m. on Thursday and says, honestly, they said 2 days. It's about a day. I mean, it's about a day and 4 hours, give or take, that you have to respond to this. And I think anyone can look at this email, especially if they've dealt with journalists and outlets, and think of this as a threat, right? Especially, I have enough details to publish. This is a story. This is going to be a story. I'm going out with it. You have a day to respond to me. Good luck with that. I think it's happy, but who knows? And that can read as a threat. In fact, I think it probably does read as a threat in this context and with this area of sensitivity. Her response, says this author, would have largely determined what I published. And as my editor noted on Sunday, at that point, no decisions had actually been made by the Herald's editors on whether to publish anything. And yet you told Rebel Wilson that you have enough details to publish, which can be read by any normal person as this is going up. I received no reply, which was entirely Rebel's right, which is a good thing to acknowledge because obviously nobody has any obligation to reply to a journalist. But when you go up with your column, you say you find the lack of response underwhelming because you were otherwise invested in good journalism, which is absolutely ridiculous at the time. In the early hours of Friday morning Sydney time, Rebel posted on Instagram about finding her Disney princess, Ramona Agruma, which I, along with the rest of the global media, wrote about. So this is Friday morning, about a day later, but before the 4-hour window where he's going to make a story. My email was never intended to be a threat, but to make it clear I was sufficiently confident with my information and to open a conversation. And yet, this is where it should be acknowledged that it can sound like a threat, but it isn't. It is not the Herald's business to out people, and that is not what we set out to do, but I understand why my email has been seen as a threat. So here, a little bit close in time here to what I said, you should acknowledge it as a threat. He does, so let's give him credit for that. The framing of it was a mistake. Again, this is the right thing to apologize for. The Herald and I will approach things differently from now on to make sure we always take into consideration the extra layer of complexities people face when it comes to their sexuality. Celebrities have huge influence in our culture. So here's where we're trying to defend this as public figure stuff. We will still ask questions, sometimes very difficult ones. It would be much worse to write gossip items about the unscripted events in their lives without them having a chance to have their say. But we need to make it clear that a deadline is not an ultimatum. In trying to tell a story within the story, which is what Private Sydney does, the tone of my column on Saturday was also off. I got it wrong. I allowed my disappointment to cast a shadow over the piece. That was not fair, and I apologize. And I think this is probably not good enough, right? You've actually seen the apology. You've seen the description of the sincere regretfulness of this individual with respect to how Rebel Wilson was treated. But to me, that's bad. And unfortunately, the kind of thing that we see from journalistic outlets a lot. But what made it much, much worse was coming out and seeming like you declared ownership of this fact of another person's life and expressing your anger at them going out with it and not giving you the quote unquote scoop. That was where things go wrong. That is maximally unethical rather than kind of a foot fault, depending on how you frame these particular situations behind the scenes. And so this is not good enough. I probably would have elevated this because this is why the story exists. This is why there's now 3 sets of notes on this, why the article gets pulled in its entirety. And it's not because a shadow over the piece was cast on the thing. It's not because that, oh, I guess that was a little more negative than I would have hoped. It's because it speaks directly to the ethical problems that the paper has with giving a comment at all. Frankly, if you just read that column as it was originally presented, you would assume that this guy's never going to ask for comment ever again. He's just going to go with things off the hook because he thinks he was burned by having to comply with these ethical standards. And maybe that's not his intent. We can give him the benefit of the doubt. But by the time you get to this point, this is way too light for what that problem actually was. And then as a result, the Herald will take down Saturday's column and replace it with this one. So that's the story. Right? That's what happened here. And it wasn't a story I was familiar with. You might be more familiar with it if you're from Brisbane or Melbourne or however else you would like to pronounce your cities. You could try me on any Australian cities. I will probably butcher them to within an inch of their lives, but I will see if they're ever referenced on an episode of Bluey so that I can get a better feel for what that pronunciation might be. But overall, it's a very interesting story because it mirrors some of the things that we've otherwise been talking about in this space, right? It mirrors the concepts of the Washington Post and Taylor Lorenz and everything else that we have talked about and whether or not these journalistic outlets can be trusted to tell the truth. When you've got somebody going out there into the world and saying effectively, we don't like that we had to give notice. We feel like we were taken advantage of because we gave this notice. It doesn't make you, fill with hope that everything is going to go right here, right? Wilson opted to gazump our story. After she sued for defamation, her choice to ignore our discreet, genuine, and honest queries was, in our view, underwhelming. Really? Okay. Well, at least as of yesterday, it would seem that this columnist has been talked to behind the scenes, genuinely regrets the whole situation, etc. But I don't know whether or not that's accurate. I don't know whether we should have to believe that. I think it was well written. We'll see how that journalist and that outlet proceeds on these kinds of stories. But I still think it's important because when we look at these kinds of things, it's going to govern how we think about every other journalist and how they treat comments, how they treat requests for comment, how they treat what it is that they're actually writing about, whether they resent the ethical bounds that are designed to make things more accurate and more useful to the public. And so that's why I wanted to raise it today. I thought it was really, really interesting. We're going to talk through some super chats. I see a big one has been given, so thank you for the support. We'll talk about that in just a second. Otherwise, that's the only article I have prepared today. We're going to hang out a little bit more. Maybe we'll just do hour-long episodes as we have some of these stories, if that makes sense. Or maybe I'll prepare 2 articles on other episode days. Before we get into those super chats, I do want to mention again, I said this yesterday, but right now we're trying out a schedule that will do headlines hangouts on Mondays and Tuesdays. And then also on Thursdays and Fridays. So in terms of shorthand, Wednesdays off, essentially. And we're going to try that out. That would be 4 days a week, but with that break day in the middle of the week that I think could work pretty well. So there won't be a Hangouts and Headlines tomorrow, he says, unless something big breaks. But I do think that that's a schedule that I can keep up with, but we're going to check that out probably for a couple of weeks.